Welcome to the Three Things Podcast. I'm David Iglesias, Director of Wheaton Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics. You may be wondering why this podcast is called Three Things. You were probably taught by your parents, like I was, that it was impolite to talk to people about three things: religion, politics, and money. But what happens if your job is to talk about those three things? Well, let's find out. Welcome to the Three Things Podcast. Today I've got a special guest coming to you all from Tennessee. His name is Herbert Slatery III, and he's got a really interesting bio, folks, because he spent 30 years in the public or in the private sector, and then the Supreme Court selected him to be the Attorney General. Now, some of you all might remember that I ran for Attorney General, and it led to some good things, but I lost my first race. Fortunately, Mr. Slater didn't have to worry about that. But his consulting firm is located in Knoxville, Tennessee. He recently completed an 8-year term as Tennessee's Attorney General, which is the state's top legal officer. Prior to this service in that position, he served as counsel to Governor Bill Haslam for 4 years. And recall that I interviewed Governor Haslam here a few years ago and found him to be engaging and fascinating as well. Mr. Slatery is from Knoxville, Tennessee, where he engaged in private practice for 30 years with Egerton, McAfee, Armistead, and Davis PC. He was a president for a number of years and later its chairman. He's currently special counsel to that firm. He and his wife, Carrie, have been married for over 48 years. That is the single most impressive thing I think I've read from your bio. Wow. You have 2 grown children and 1 10-year-old granddaughter, members of Cedar Springs Presbyterian Church in Knoxville since 1980, where he served as an elder for many years. Well, welcome to Three Things Podcast, sir.
Thank you, David. I look forward to speaking with you. I appreciate you inviting me on, and I just want to thank you again for your service to our country in so many different ways. Public service is an amazing journey, and it really makes a difference who's filling in those positions. So, thank you.
Well, that's a fact.
Yeah.
Well, you're most welcome. And I do note that we're doing this interview on Veterans Day, which was not my plan. It just happened that way. So here we are. Well, first, let me ask you this, sir. What first got you interested in the law? And I can't wait to hear your answer, because every lawyer has their own story of how they got into the law.
Well, actually, I knew a lawyer in Memphis, Tennessee, a guy named Ken Clark, who I just had the utmost respect for him, even more now. But he was really, really smart. He was quick. He cared about people. He wasn't too impressed with himself. And I don't know, that just watching him, how he interacted with people, that drew me a little bit to it. And then I worked for a bank in Memphis for 3 years, and whenever there was a significant decision, it seemed like the lawyers were brought in, so that I wanted to know the answers instead of just having all of the questions. And but there was a practical aspect of it too. I remember asking one of their partners to send me a demand note. He sent me a 1-page demand note and a bill for $400. So I thought, well, I wasn't making a lot of money back then. I said, if they make this kind of money, I might be interested.
That's fair. All right. And then you decided to go to UVA for undergrad, and that's a beautiful campus. By the way, that's where my wife graduated from. So I've been on that beautiful campus many times. Tell me about UT College of Law. So why Tennessee and not some other school? Why some other school?
I was recently married, and I was trying to figure out, what the best plan would be for both of us. And the UT is a really good law school. It fit the economics piece of it. They also had a joint degree, joint MBA and JD degree program, and I thought that would really be interesting. I started out in that, so that drew me. They also said that when you practice or when you go to law school, Tennessee, you're going to be practicing with people who are going to be judges and DAs and people that you have to deal with all the time, and getting to know them in law school will help. And that really has panned out that way.
It's interesting you say that, because that's almost the exact same reasons why I picked New Mexico School of Law. I mean, what you're saying resonates with me, because I could have gone to some other schools, but I just thought, well, I'm going to practice here. I want to get to know the folks as law students first, and maybe I'll get a break when they're a judge or something. Yeah. So you spent 30 years in the private sector, and then you went public. So tell me about that transition. What made you leave the private sector and start working for Governor Haslam, and then seek the nomination or selection by the Supreme Court?
Well, the big reason is a relationship. I got to know Governor Haslam when we were little boys, to be honest with you, and our family sort of grew up together, and then we were involved in a group that met on Friday mornings and for a long time. And I watched him, he ran for mayor, and his first race was really close. His second race was not. And I didn't think I was a very good friend during that process. And so I told him if he ever did anything like that again, I wanted to do something where I was a little closer to him and was a better friend. And so I got a call from him when he decided to run for mayor and says, "You want to be the treasurer of the campaign?" And I said, yes, although he had no idea what he was asking me to do, and I had no idea what I was volunteering to do. So they raised $16.5 million, and then I had to oversee the expenditures and kept all the records and stood up the organization and everything. It was a fascinating task. But after that, I've been exposed to a whole different world that I knew before. I mean, the people, the way they looked at decisions, the gravitas that's involved in public service, all those things were really beckoning to me. And it happened at a particular time in my career where I was happy. I think I had a pretty good practice, but there was and the best way I could describe it, there was a sort of dis-ease with what I wish I could do something different that had some import to it that would be dramatically different than what I was engaged in from a private practice standpoint. And so when he was elected governor, I sort of raised my hand and said, I'd be interested in looking at joining the administration if you think there's a place for me. So we talked. I ended up being his counsel for 4 years. But the bottom line is that he's a believer. I'm a believer. I care a lot about him and his family. We just wanted him to be successful. Whatever we could do to do that, that's what we were signing up for.
Well, now which kind of you kind of anticipated my next question. You said a believer, and I assume that means a believer in Christ. So
right.
Tell me how you came to faith in Christ.
Well, I'm a young life. I don't know how you would say that, graduate, participant, supporter, whatever. And actually in high school, when I was 16 years old, we played in a basketball game and got beat. And my best friend wanted to go to the Young Life Camp, and he couldn't drive. I happened to have a learner's permit at that point, as I recall, so I could drive. And so he persuaded me to go. I didn't really want to go, and so we went after the game, and it was David, it was the first time that I really heard the gospel.
Wow.
I'm sure it was preached in my church, but I had never heard it. And this guy talked about Jesus being the greatest leader that the world has ever seen. He could walk through crowds if he wanted to, but the fact that he wanted to, build a relationship, reach out, know me, had a plan for my life. All of that was just, I couldn't believe it. It was so good. So that's where it all started. Now, there's been some significant bumps along the road, as most people experience, but I'm really thankful for Young Life. And my daughter was on staff with Young Life. My son was work crew. They both are heavily involved in Young Life as a result of our involvement. So we still care about what's going on with Young Life.
Well, that's great. It's really good to hear the parachurch organizations that are effective like that, because you don't know. I mean, sometimes, they do good work, God's work. Other times they fall off the tracks, and you just don't know. I'm so glad to talk to somebody that Young Life made all the difference in the world. So thank you for sharing that. Now, I want to ask you a few questions about the absolutely unique way in which the state of Tennessee selects its attorney general. Because, as you know, in all the other states, there are only two ways to get in: the governor appoints you, or you have to run for partisan political office, which is what I did. And the state of Tennessee ended up doing it a third way. So tell me about that. What does Tennessee do?
Well, in Tennessee, we're the only state that does this. The Supreme Court appoints the Attorney General, and it appoints the Attorney General to an 8-year term, which is commensurate with the judges. The Attorney General is part of the judiciary in Tennessee, not the executive branch.
Interesting.
And it's been that way since 1870, so it's worked really well for over 150 years. But it is unique. You're right. 43 states, I think, have partisan elections, and the other 7 have some sort of appointment process, whether it's the governor, Tennessee, or I think there's a legislative process in Maine. So Tennessee's really unique, but it's a pretty good system.
Now, has anybody ever challenged that in terms of I don't know? I'm sure somebody can think of some theory to challenge the appointment process.
Well, it's part of our Constitution, so you'd have to you would have to bring an action under the Constitution, and that I think nobody, to my knowledge, has challenged it on that basis. What they have done is the legislature, from time to time, in fact, it's consistently challenged by the legislature. They would like to have a role in picking the AG or confirming the AG or whatever, and we've frankly have fought those bills both in the executive branch and as Attorney General. My last year as AG, I spent a lot of time fighting one particular bill that would change that.
Mm. Wow. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that is going to ask you to not be a modest man. So I'm going to ask you to talk about what's their criteria. What's the Supreme Court's criteria for selecting an AG? Because obviously you have the criteria.
Well, it's up to the court. We have a Supreme Court of 5 members, so it's up to the court to determine the process and who they're looking for. But I think they're going to be looking for somebody who's smart, that has somebody who has the integrity, that's not going to be questioned at all. But the real value, one of the real values of the process is they get to choose a real lawyer. They don't have to choose a politician.
Exactly.
And one of the advantages of it, David, to be honest, is the AG in Tennessee does not get up every morning wondering, what's my media presence, what's my campaign balance, how can I be reelected, all those types of things. He just comes in to work. And I think the citizens of Tennessee get a tremendous value by having somebody who just works and who's a good lawyer. Now, people have different opinions on myself, but if you look at the list of AGs in Tennessee, that's a list of really, really fine lawyers, and I think and the state has benefited from it. So I'm a strong proponent of it. It really is amazing. Now, when I got appointed, one of the things I think that attracted them was the fact that I had been involved in state government for 4 years. I had dealt with all of the legislative committees. I knew the players, and in Tennessee at that particular time, the court was looked upon fairly or unfairly, probably unfairly, as a Democratic court, and so we had a supermajority Republican legislature in both houses and a Republican governor, and the legislature in particular, one branch, the Senate branch, was at odds with the Supreme Court, and in a number of different ways. In fact, in 2014, they actually raised $650,000 to run against 3 members of the court that were considered Democrats. And the judges in Tennessee, Supreme Court judges, are appointed by the governor, but then they have to run in a retention election within a couple of years. So it's a yes, no. And it's not just rubber stamp. Tennessee is one of the states where a Supreme Court justice actually was not retained by popular vote. So it works in Tennessee. So, but at that particular time, I think the court looked and the list of candidates. I fit. I think, and I think it was a way of maybe calming the water somewhat, which I did try to do. So. But they do look for a good lawyer. I had this conversation with the legislator one time, and we were going back and forth. And I just asked her, I said, "Do you not think that the Supreme Court of Tennessee could appoint a top lawyer?" And she smiled at me and said, "Well, we'll just have to disagree on that one."
Oh boy, ouch. Well, so you must have practiced a lot in front of them because obviously they knew who you were. So how many cases did you argue in front of the state Supreme Court?
Really, I didn't argue many cases. What helped me was the 2 of them. I was involved in their appointment because one of the tasks that Governor Haslam gave us was vetting all of the appellate court judges that he was going to appoint. That's one of the great legacies of governors. And this is interesting. Well, they had a public interview of all the candidates, and then they selected 3 and had private interviews. And so in the public interview, I remember one judge, Holly Kirby, smiled and said, "Mr. Slatery, I just want to point out that now the shoe is on the other foot." And so I told her, I said, "I hope I do as well as you do." You did.
That's great. Yeah. So no, but obviously they knew you, they knew of you. Plus, I'm sure Governor Haslam put in a good word. I mean, that's not the kind of job where they post a job announcement on the internet. I mean, it's probably known by the people that need to be known. But how many years or months did you first think about, well, maybe this is what God has for me next?
That came completely out of left field.
Wow.
I was putting on a putting green, getting ready to play golf, and a really prominent lawyer I was going to play with came up, walked up to me and said, "You ought to be the next AG." And I looked at him like he was crazy. I said, "What are you?" I mean, I had a great job. I really loved working with Governor Haslam, and I had no ambition to go further. I was happy with doing what I was doing, and but he said, "No, I'm serious. You need to think about that." And then I'm sure there were conversations in the background that I wasn't aware of, but I think that Monday, Governor Haslam came in my office and sat down and said, "What do you think about this AG stuff?" So I told him, the first thing I told him was, I managed law firms for a long time already, and I think I've had enough of that. But I said, if I'm happy to, think about it, but I would never do it unless I had your blessing, unless you told me it was okay to do it, because we came to Nashville, and my wife and I, by the way, I'm married way over my head. My wife and I came to Nashville solely for the purpose of, supporting and trying to make you and Chrissy's run successful. So that, so this is a different calling, and I'm not going to pull off the first without your consent. So he said, "Well, I think you need to think about it." So one thing led to another, and I applied.
Well, now your story about you were just on a golf green and some random lawyer says you should be our next AG. That makes me think of when I was in Acapulco, Mexico, and the USS New Orleans pulls in this gigantic helicopter carrier, this amphibious assault ship. And out of the blue, I thought, I want to do that. I mean, God put that ship at that harbor at that time when I was there. just like he put that lawyer at that golf course at that green at the same time you were to start the process. So, wow, that really resonates.
He promises that in Psalm 32. He says, I will instruct you in the way that you should go, and I will counsel with you with my eye upon you. But the next verse is, do not be like the horse or the mule whose trappings include bit and bridle, and otherwise you can't control them and you can't come near them. And so that last verse is our responsibility, is to be able to, right, to recognize those opportunities, to say, is that something you want me to do? Is that part of the plan? But he promises that he'll guide us.
Well, now I'm gonna read Psalm 32 again. I've read the Book of Psalms many times, but it's just interesting at God's word. At certain points in your life, certain verses just jump out at you and tackle you. It seems like. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you about your time as AG. What would you say was your top accomplishment as a Tennessee Attorney General?
If you ask most people, I think they would say the first thing would be the how we worked on the opioid epidemic. Tennessee was one of the leading states in the settlement with the 3 pharmaceutical distributors and Johnson & Johnson, which was a $26.5 billion settlement, which is the second largest, I think, in civil American history. So that's going to come up. And the interesting thing about that, and David, this is a pretty good secret. It shouldn't be, but it is. AGs get things done, and they get things done on a bipartisan basis. That may have been what drew you to get interested in it. But I mean, some of my best friends, in fact, one of my very best friends just got elected as the governor of North Carolina, and we talked almost daily through that process for over 6 years.
Good grief.
Yeah, we worked on it hard. So I think most people would say that would be. And then, for some reason, I got a really top award from the National Association of AGs that people would probably point to that. But the real win for me was the way that I got to reset our office. I was the first Republican AG since Reconstruction.
Oh my!
And there haven't been too many in New Mexico. I looked that up, so you would have been the second one, right?
Yeah. So I worked for Hal Stratton, who won by 600 votes in 86 or so. Mm-hmm. And he told me the only reason he won is because there was a major snowstorm in northern New Mexico that suppressed the vote of the other party.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it had been since it hadn't been Reconstruction for us, but it had been since the 1920s. So mm-hmm. I knew what the history was, and I figured, well, if God be for me, who can be against me? I just rolled the dice.
But the fun part for me was when I came in, looking back and watching how I was able to get people to come and work with us, and each one had a story. And if you listen to the stories, it's just no way that happens by chance. Right. So many things happen by timing. My chief of staff was a friend for over 30 years, and we were in a young married couple's Sunday school class, and he ended up 30 years in the energy field, and then retired at an appropriate time. My solicitor general was probably the best writer I've ever seen, and she wanted to have a change, and she came, and I mean, she was one of my top people who really, really did help me. But I can go down the list of 7 or 8. One of them's on the Tennessee Supreme Court right now. I mean, I tried that particular one as a funny story because she sent me 2 letters, and I lost the first one, and the second one, somebody had to come in my office and said, "You need to talk to this woman." So, even in spite of myself, I ended up getting just great people to work with, and those are the wonderful stories. That, to me, that's the best part of being an AG for during that period of time. So,
all right. Well, let me ask you a more delicate question. What would you consider is your top loss as Attorney General?
That's a hard one. We lost a lot of cases, especially in federal court at the district court level. We didn't win too many of those, but the one that really hurt the most was we had a case that was part of the Obergefell trio of cases, and it was argued in the Supreme Court by one of our associate solicitor generals. It's called the Tanco case, and ours was a little different take. Our position was that Tennessee did not recognize same-sex marriages at that time, and we thought it was constitutional. And the plaintiffs were they had a marriage from outside of Tennessee, and they just wanted Tennessee to recognize those relationships. And of course, we did not do that. But when we argued the case, Judge Scalia really basically said the same thing they said in Dobbs. Why don't we let the states decide? And
right.
if they have a valid marriage or some other law, then you just recognize it, but you don't have to validate it yourself. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's not what they held. But that was probably the biggest loss in our estimation. So.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Let me ask you this. What advice would you give your 25-year-old self about life as a lawyer, first in the private sector and then in the public sector?
Well, I wish that someone had told me earlier the value of public sector experience. And you got public sector experience really early, which I envy. What I didn't realize is that once you enter the public sector, especially in the areas where I was involved, everything you did was had such gravitas to it. I used to sit in my office, which was adjacent to Governor Haslam's conference room, and I would be in a lot of the meetings, but some of the meetings I wasn't there. I knew what the subjects were, and you're just drawn to virtually everything. And there's that, and then you get quick experience in the public sector that you don't get, especially if you're interested in litigation. You get to try cases, argue cases, and I mean, we had one guy. I think the first 6 months there, he got to argue in front of the Tennessee Supreme Court.
Good grief!
Now he had to have 10 moot courts, I think, to get ready.
I'm sure,
but you'd have never gotten that in the private sector. No. So there's some real value on private sector. I wish I'd learned more about that earlier on. As far as just being a lawyer in private practice, it's lawyers work.
Yeah, and they do.
And that you just can't get around it wherever you are. And it's just you better be part of your DNA, because it's not something where you can just, if you got a client, they call you, they want you to do the work. Mm-hmm. So it's hard, but it's incredibly interesting based on the issues. You very rarely deal with anything that's just exactly the same way twice. So.
Well, that's right. Well, and your comment about getting a lot of responsibility quickly makes me think of a recruiting poster I saw for the U.S. Navy as I was thinking about it. And it said, Navy officers get responsibility fast. And that certainly was my case. I was trying cases within 6 months of graduating from Naval Justice School. And man, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew enough to win my first case as a defense attorney in a criminal case. So I thought to myself, this stuff really works. A reasonable doubt really works. So because I was skeptical, and
we were recruiting the same. I and a friend of mine who's in private practice, a prominent lawyer in Nashville, we were recruiting the same young man, and he wanted to do litigation and get some experience. And finally, my friend just looked at me and said, "Hey, he really needs to go to you because he won't get in a courtroom for 10 years
right.
if he comes with us to really handle something significant." And so I said, "Well, he'll be in the first year in our shop." So, yeah.
Let me guess where he went.
Yes. we did get him.
I bet. So let me ask you, this is a variation of the question I just asked you. What about for Wheaton students? So a Wheaton student is a very bright Christian undergrad who is interested in going to a tier 1 or tier 2 school. What advice would you give them to get ready for that intense 3 years of experience?
Well, I would encourage them to go down that road. I was dealing with Governor Haslam one afternoon, and we were talking about something, and he looked at me and he said, I really enjoy dealing with lawyers. And I looked at him and said, most people are not going to say that. I said, why is that true? And he said, well, you get to the real issue quickly. You analyze things and you get to what the real issue is. Then you try to figure out how to solve it and address it. And that's what law school offers, I think, is the analytical thinking. That to me, you have to be sold on that, but that's worth getting. And the degree is really valuable, whether you practice law or not. I mean, you can take it anywhere. And so I would encourage them now, as far as choosing schools and things like that. I'm pretty far away from that at this point, but I would, if I were them, I would go to the school that they're interested in and sit in on classes. And I particularly wish I had done that, but there was one professor at my law school. His name was Forrest Lacey, and he taught contracts. And David, every time I loved his class. Everybody else well, not everybody else, but a lot of people were just scared of him because he would call on you and that sort of thing. But he made me think like nobody ever made me think. I left his classrooms with a headache virtually every day. I mean, it was intense, but he pushed me to think. And so it is a great profession and a great degree. But I would look for a law school that gives that kind of professor. You've got that kind of availability. I would talk to lawyers who have graduated from there, recent and not recent. They can probably get you interviews with some professors or people who really know the inside. And I would just do the research on it. Now I'll just be honest with you. If I was talking to a Wheaton student, I would probably say I would move the elite law schools, the Ivy League law schools, further down the list. And their worldview is just different. It is really, really different, and it permeates everything that they. Sure. I think everything that they do. And there's a reason that Justice Thomas, when he selects clerks, he frequently selects students not from Ivy League schools, but from, Midwest schools. And there are a lot of really good law schools, but I would be very suspicious myself. I just think the elite schools are the Ivy Leagues in particular. And I think the past year has sort of shown, some of that. Yeah. I don't know whether you're familiar with the Alliance Defending Freedom.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Well, we're pretty close to that, and that, their now executive director had a really unhappy experience with one of the elite law schools, just on freedom of expression. So, basic things, So.
Yeah, and I've had folks coming up from First Liberties come and talk because there are several really top-notch religious liberties law firms out there, and we really try to encourage students to consider that because there's a reason that freedom of religion is the First Amendment and not the Fourth or Fifth or Sixth.
Yes, exactly. I've got a good friend at First Liberty, Jeff Mateer, who's just a great guy. We haven't seen him in a long time, but I've got great respect for First Liberty too. Those are two fine organizations.
Amen. Well, I just got a couple more questions for you, and these are pretty straightforward. So I'll just ask them to you. What's your favorite verse in the Bible?
My favorite verse is, I've got a lot, but and I know one of your guests mentioned Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, which is those are great verses. But John 15:5 has always been in my background. It says, "For apart from me, you can do nothing." And I often picture God saying, now, Herbert, how many times do you have to realize that, nothing means nothing? and and it's interestingly, I mentioned the last offending freedom. That's their verse, which, but when I was, just to see how it plays out, when I was in Governor Haslam's office working with him, I would want to be in every meeting that he had in that conference room. And finally, I was reading the greatest opening sentence of virtually any book. That may be The Tale of Two Cities. Rick Warren's, The Purpose-Driven Life. It's not about you. And and so I asked my assistant to type that out in bold, and I put it above the door where I would be looking at it every day. Say, it's not about you. It's about the Lord. It's about Governor Haslam. It's not about you. But there's some freedom in that. It's just, really, I start prayers like that. I know, and that I can't do anything without you. It's in significance, and we live and move and have our being in Him, according to Acts 17. So so that's my favorite verse, and I need to be reminded of it every day, more and more and more.
I think all of us do. Yeah, no, that's just beautiful. It's easy to get distracted with power or money or other things, and Rick Warren, really, I think he was inspired by God to start his book off like that, because it hits you between the eyes, and you think about it, you say to yourself, he is so right. But the world says it is about you. So great, go for all the gusto. It's like that old that old ad. They used to say something like, "You only go around once in life, so you got to grab for all the gusto you can, because it's about you. And if it's not about you, then you don't have to worry about that stuff." All right. Well, I just have one final question, and that is there anything I should have asked you that I did not?
You've asked some great questions. Probably one thing I mentioned this group of men that we met with, and you never know what the Lord's going to do to form you. But that group, but I would also say you have no idea what God's going to do with your life. I mean, I would never ever have told somebody I'd be the Attorney General. I mean, it just was never on the radar at all. But that's what he wanted me to do. And but back in the mid '80s, we started a group that our wives dubbed the Friday Five, and your chair, by the way, Greg Adams, was in that group. He helped us form that, and we met on Friday mornings, and Greg actually told this story at my swearing in. He said, we were just five guys. There was a banker, a retail guy, a guy in retail gas. There was a lawyer, a banker. So he says we were all just clueless. We wanted to figure out how do you be a better husband? How do you be a better father? How do you lead a church? How do you figure out what your calling is? How do you stay true to what you believe? All those types of things that are just really important. And we met for a couple of years, and it was fine and everything. But then there was really a fulcrum point or threshold that we crossed where all of a sudden people were changing their travel plans to be sure they were home on Thursday night so they could be there on Friday mornings. And we almost knocked the door down to get there on Friday mornings. And we met that group. Now, Greg, he was with IBM's, which, I've been moved. And he was moved, I think, 14 times. So
yeah, that's amazing.
But that group met for 25 years on Fridays. Wow. And to say that it changed us is, would just be the understatement of the year. And, fast forward, and this is what he was sharing with the group, the people who attended my swearing in. He said, there was a time when there were three of us on the first floor of the Capitol. Now, one of us had a much bigger office than the other two, but there were three of us on the first floor of the Tennessee Capitol. And who would have ever dreamed that was God's plan? So those things those small things and meeting on that nobody sees, those are the types of things that God uses in big ways, because that's something that he can get some glory from, not something that we manufacture or go after ourselves, or that's our ambition or whatever. This is he's saying, this is my story and this is how it's going to play out.
Right. Yeah. And I try to tell Wheaton students here, look, take your time, have a plan, but also be willing to change on a moment's notice, because you don't know what opportunities God's going to put in your way. And I don't know anyone who did exactly what they set out to do later in life. Yeah, that's just not knowable. I had small dreams and God had bigger dreams for me. I took opportunities. I took chances. I failed sometimes and I won sometimes, but God had a plan that took me a while to figure out. And the second thing I tell my students is, you're in a big hurry. You think you got the world by the tail at age 22, but I didn't break out of the pack till I was 36. So you just never know. And don't think you're a failure if you don't achieve all your plans in your 20s, because I don't know anybody that does.
That's great advice. I've told a friend of mine that, for the longest time, I just felt like, well, if they put something on my grave, it would be that I was an elder at Cedar Springs Presbyterian Church, which I was fine with.
Yeah.
But, he had a different plan. And, the God we serve, he is not a boring God.
No.
He's got plans, and he's got a mission, and he's gonna accomplish it. He wants to use all of us.
Well, and look what he did with the jailbird named Joseph, or the murderer named Moses, or the adulterer murderer named David. I mean, who would have predicted any greatness from those guys?
And they were all reluctant leaders for the most part.
Moses, so much so, he said, I can't talk, God, and you need somebody who can talk. And then God said, that's fine. I'll send your brother Aaron, who can speak for you.
By the end of Deuteronomy, though, Moses is the one that's talking.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, you kind of wonder what happened to Aaron. He probably got sent to second string or something.
That's right.
Anyway, hey, this has been a great talk. I want to thank you so much for your time, because I know that you're probably busy doing other things. But thank you for rogering up quickly and talking to me. And I'll let you know when this is up. All right.
Well, that'd be great. I thank you. And, I've been a fan of Wheaton for a long time. And, Governor Haslam had a son that went there. And But I spent an afternoon, the fall afternoon, in the chapel at UVA reading 2 books about Jim Elliot.
Oh,
that was my introduction to Wheaton College. And I said, I need to find out more about this place.
Yeah, Elliot was amazing, because he was in his 20s when he wrote a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like God just said, you're not going to live long, but I'm going to pour wisdom into you, and you're going to get that wisdom out. And I've got profound respect for what Jim Elliot did.
Yeah, those are great stories. And I was walking down the aisle. I know you need to go, but I was walking down the aisle of our church before a service, and I passed this woman, and I said, "She looks really familiar." And it was Nate Saint's wife.
Oh, wow.
And I went back. She was talking to our kids in their Sunday school class, and I said, "I'm going to that Sunday school class." And she told her the whole story. I mean, it was just amazing. So, yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. Blessings on you, and
same to you. Hope we get to meet in person sometime.
Me too. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you, David.
You have been listening to Wheaton's Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics podcast. 3 Things with host David Iglesias. Join us again in 2 weeks for a new interview with an accomplished faith, political, and business leader.